We all have our demons.
Not enough pain.
What's up, YouTube? It's Kaelrian, back with another video. Today, doing a little story time, talking about the lore of Warcraft. Which almost sounds like the World of Warcraft, but not quite. But anyways, this week on my blog, I wrote a piece that I liked, and I've been kind of grappling with the idea of for a while over on WordPress. It was basically talking about Warlords of Draenor, but it touched upon a theme that is kind of near and dear to me, and that's the lore of WoW. I think I need to start first of all by saying Blizzard at best are good to maybe above average storytellers, but usually a lot of their stuff is just okay. It doesn't, I don't want to say it misses the mark, it just, there's not much of a mark for it to hit. Like, they do excellent world building, but often the overall lore tends to get sacrificed in the name of whatever's convenient to set up the gameplay. Which, to be honest, I'm pretty okay with. I do like that they put effort into world building. I know that, like, I like the overall story of Final Fantasy XIV better, but I don't feel as connected with some of its locations as I do with those in WoW. So I think it's just a different strength. I feel like WoW generally builds up its worlds better, and I feel like 14 has a more cohesive story. But what I kind of wanted to talk about in particular is something kind of struck me when I was writing about Warlords of Draenor, which is also, besides the fact that I just am doing some transmog farming while I'm in Hellfire Citadel from WoD. So what I noticed with Warlords, this happens a little bit with Legion too, don't get me wrong, but really heavily with Warlords. The game is really kind of, the terminology I used was a love letter to the old RTS games, because effectively a lot of the lore that is in Warlords of Draenor, the alternate history that it tries to get you really excited about, is really about the RTSs. There's not a whole lot of lore from Warlords that leans on previous WoW stuff. And that's okay, but like the thought I had is that if you look even just back to Warlords launch in late 2014, at that point, assuming that the relevant stuff was mostly in Warcraft 3, it was 12 years old at that point in terms of lore. Like, we don't even really reference stuff from vanilla in terms of lore that much anymore, partially because there wasn't a whole lot there, but also because, holy shit, it's been a long time. If we were to suddenly bring back, like, well, okay, I was about to say if we bring back Cthulhu, that's probably going to happen. And you know what? It'll probably be a little weird then too. But basically, Warlords relies a lot on old-ass lore from the RTS games. Big chunks of it are Warcraft 3. The primary arc with Grom Hellscream as the main villain, and Garrosh being the patsy for that, is kind of intended to remind you of Warcraft 3 and how Grom, you know, sacrificed himself to save the orcs and free them of that demonic bond and all that. And there are specific things in, like, the cinematic trailer and all of that that are designed to very specifically call back to that. Which is cool for long-term fans, but the thought that kind of occurs to me is, at this point, how many people playing WoW really played the Warcraft RTSs? And of them, how many of those people played more than just Warcraft 3? Because I think here's a situation I find myself in that helped me contextualize this a little bit. I've only ever played Warcraft 3. I've never actually finished Warcraft 3 either in terms of the story mode. I mainly just played a couple of LAN matches with a friend and guildie. Well, current guildie. We obviously, WoW wasn't out at the time, so we weren't guildies then. But yeah, we did a local LAN. I dragged my tower over to his house one day, and we got everything hooked up, and we played a few matches that way. And it was pretty cool. Like, I liked RTSs. The only story mode I had finished at that point in a Blizzard RTS, though, was StarCraft. I had done StarCraft, I did Brood War, I played all those missions. They were fun. Warcraft, I didn't really own, though, until a lot later. I had a pirated copy. I know, boo this man. But I never really, like, got around to finishing it. I maybe did... God, I don't even remember how many missions it was. I think I barely did, like, 3 in the story, and then I goofed around a lot. And I think that's the problem I have with some of the more recent attempts to do callbacks in WoW lore. Like, on the one hand, it's good that they try to keep the pretense that it has this, you know, this rich history, because that is a part of Warcraft's appeal to some people. At launch, it was a big part of the appeal. Like, really, the whole reason for Warcraft 3 to introduce a lot of new characters and really try to solidify locations and geography and stuff like that was really to build up WoW. Because WoW had actually been in development a little bit longer than Warcraft 3. I want to say Warcraft 3, I think, was announced in, like, 2000? And WoW had been in development in some form since 1999. So, the thing I always found really interesting about Warcraft 3 is that in a lot of ways, it really pushes hard to build a sense of location, a sense of, you know, what these places are, in service of what's going to happen with WoW. Like, if you know WoW is coming out, at some point, you have to make the plan that is going to get you there and get players invested in those locations and ready to, you know, play the damn game and do that. So you come out with Warcraft 3, it's got this lore, it's got this interesting approach to the story. And I mean, Warcraft 3's story, I mean, I haven't played through it, I've read about it, I understand it, like, fundamentally, but the thing I always found about really the sort of the emotion I feel about any Blizzard game has primarily been that the stories, especially like the really tight focused stories of the single player modes of the old games under Metzen, like, they were okay. But I mean, I gotta be honest, I love Metzen, but he's kind of a schlock. Like, a lot of his stuff is pretty straightforward, it's very archetypal. It's good in that way, like, you get what you expect out of it, but I mean, the over-reliance on some of the tropes like corrupt heroes and all that kind of thing really started with Metzen, with that stuff. And I mean, I don't think that's bad. I'm not trying to disparage Metzen. I love the dude. He's weird when he's drunk, but I like him. So it's just like this weird thing in old Blizzard games, and it's kind of continued through to present. Like, when you look at the StarCraft 2 campaign, which I need to finish Legacy of the Void. I may do that on channel sometime. I'm not committing to that yet. Hold on. But like, a lot of the stuff he's written tends to kind of build in that same direction even still. Like, Diablo 3's story focused on Leah becoming Diablo. And they had this long story to it, and the corruption was handled differently, but it was still ultimately a corrupted, you know, hero origin thing. Likewise, then, with StarCraft 2, you're dealing with Kerrigan and her corruption from StarCraft 1 and Brood War, and you're kind of trying to, if you're Jim Raynor at least, you're trying to kind of get her back. So the whole story tends to focus really, really deeply on that element, the whole corrupted hero, good guy, bad guy paradigm. And I think it's okay for it, but if you didn't know those characters, you wouldn't be as invested. And I think that's a problem with StarCraft 2 that WoW has as well, is that there's so much distance between the reuse of lore that it tends to get a little weird. Like, StarCraft, like, Brood War was probably about 9 years old when StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty came out. And Wings of Liberty didn't even have, like, it had the seeds for the narrative arc, but it wasn't, like, all the way there. But besides Kerrigan and Raynor and all that, a lot of the story arc of StarCraft 2 counted on you having played StarCraft 1 and Brood War. There were all these mentions of the Xel'Naga that were kind of explained in StarCraft 2, but not really, which would have been confusing. So it's a habit that Blizzard has a lot, besides their tropes in general. Like, just the amount of time between chapters of their games leads to this sort of thing where, oh, we can reference something that happened in StarCraft 1, but then when you do, you have a bunch of new players who haven't actually played any of those games and maybe haven't watched the story. And in some cases, some of these games are so old that story, like cinematic teasers and shit, aren't even on YouTube. Like, they probably are at this point more. I mean, especially now with StarCraft Remastered, but at the time, that was a tall order. You had to get people really heavily on board to kind of commit to sitting down and really like putting in the effort to watch that stuff. And even better, like, to play through that stuff, because StarCraft 1 is still a pretty damn good game. But back to WoW on this topic, it becomes especially problematic with Warcraft 2 references. Like, even when Cataclysm came out, like, Deathwing was such a far-gone memory from, like, the mid to late 90s that, honestly, like, he didn't have as much appeal, because you had to spend a good chunk of time in-game explaining why it was important that we were fighting him, or why it mattered, or why it was like this interesting like thing. And the game, like in-game, that didn't really happen all that well. There's a series of quests in Twilight Highlands where they kind of try to start to bring it together, and they kind of try to show what happened a little bit with the Reds in Grim Batal in the dungeon, but it's not really an elegant, like, full-on depiction of the lore that makes you care much about Deathwing. It like does the job in a sort of utilitarian way where it's there and you can kind of get a good sense of where the story is without having played those games, but good fucking luck otherwise. So, I mean, I do like that they're shifting in more of a WoW specific direction. I like that they wrote Chronicle and have continued that series, and it exists now to unify the canon. But it's worth saying that while I like Chronicle in theory, the actual problem with Chronicle is that they have already, in Antorus, undone one of the Chronicle changes, specifically with the Titans, just to make a cool gameplay moment and a cool in-game story moment. So, ultimately, there are a lot of problems with Blizzard storytelling in general. And in particular, their biggest problem is that they are gameplay focused, but they always have this insistence on story. And so, they end up, like, revamping and retconning stuff that didn't necessarily fit all that well, so that they can just turn around and make the gameplay element they wanted to make. So yes, okay, well, the Titans were supposedly dead, and you know, something's going on. Their spirits are supposed to be in the Keepers, but also their spirits are in Antorus, and fuck it makes sense for reasons. And like, for me, I'm more interested in the gameplay in WoW. Like, I like the lore. Like I've said, I really like the sense of world building and all of that, but I'm not over here trying to like play this game to get the cinematics and the lore out. If I want RPG with dedicated storytelling and some MMO elements, I have Final Fantasy XIV installed. I can play that at any time. I'm not in WoW for the story. I do like I said earlier, the world building, but honestly, I feel like in the community, and I'm a part of this too, I do a lot of speculation and stuff that's based on lore. We have this tendency to like drive ourselves mad by trying to like look at everything Blizzard does and say, okay, that makes some sense, and that's where we think this might go based on the direction of the lore. And then you get into the game and it's like, no, it's fucking not, because they forgot they did that story element, like from, 3 years ago or whatever. So now some offhand line in Pandaria that should have mattered doesn't. And I mean, does it necessarily matter? Probably not in the long run. Like, if the overall story is good, I could probably forgive that more. But oftentimes the story is kind of hokey. So you put all these weird, jagged puzzle pieces together, and I mean, like, I'll enjoy it because the gameplay that's, you know, kind of built around it is fun. To me, at least. I mean, I know that MMO gameplay is not everyone's cup of tea. WoW gameplay specifically is not everyone's cup of tea. So I can understand why people might not, like, really dig into it, and that's fine. You know, like, I get that, but overall, like, the reason I'm still playing WoW isn't because I have some deep investment in the lore, and for that matter, that's not why a lot of people played vanilla WoW either. Like, I enjoy that they put more emphasis on storytelling over the years, especially with the Cataclysm vignette system, and then what they ended up doing with in-game cinematics has been really good over the years. But the overarching problem with a lot of that stuff is that you put all of this increased emphasis on storytelling, on doing cinematics and doing all this interesting stuff in game, but if the story itself that's underpinning all of that is just okay, then what does it really matter, you know? I like that they try to connect things and they try to bring back references and stuff like that. I just wish they did it more, you know, with more continuity, with more actual, like, honest continuity. Like, I remember way back, like, being a player in vanilla when they announced Burning Crusade and that Draenei were going to be around, and everyone flipped their shit, and Metzen had to write posts about retcons, and everybody was losing their mind. But, like, how many retcons have we had in Legion? Like, just in Legion. Like, we have this other faction of Draenei that nobody knew about, including Velen. We have Illidan back because it turns out actually his soul just wanders when he dies. And that somehow also happens to player demon hunters who are both knight and blood elves. You know, and that one, yeah, okay, it's gameplay justification. I get it. I bring it up because it is an inconsistency, but I'm not going to rag on it. I don't give a shit. And then, like, okay, so there's that. There's the Titan business in Antorus. The Tomb of Sargeras is, you know, that's reasonable. There's not really, like, a retcon there now that I think about it. It's kind of ambiguous that, like, this place has Naga in it. Like, some of the bosses in Tomb of Sargeras are kind of left field. Because you would have thought, like, Illidan partnered with the Naga and all that. That would have been more of a thing that would have been brought up, but... And it gets kind of brought up in-game, but it seems a little left field. So I don't remember there being a whole lot of... Oh, yeah, we sealed the tomb away. And also, there's some Naga in there just kind of hanging out. So, you know... And then some Murlocs, and also some Night Elf spirits, because everyone's having a party down here. But I think for the future, I have some optimism for where the storytelling is going. We're now a couple of expansions deep into this idea where Blizzard kind of starts building the storytelling to push us in a direction before the expansion's out. And I really like that. I liked at the end of Legion, or at the end of Warlords, actually, first to start, where we went pretty hard in a Fel and Demon direction. I mean, look at all this green. Look at that. But it wasn't, like, full-on demons yet. It was, like, it was kind of still orcs. It was still kind of Warlords, but it had, like, this little taste of what was to come with Legion. And likewise, at the end of Legion now, we have... these little bits and indicators that there's something going on with old gods and the void and the light and all of that. Now, Battle for Azeroth at first doesn't seem to necessarily strike on a lot of those themes, but oftentimes Blizzard have had subplots in a lot of expansions. Warlords in particular has 3 different plots that are kind of interwoven, which is sort of the alternate history Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3 business, where all these lore characters are getting like, hey, remember Ner'zhul? You know how he turns into the Lich King? Oh, you didn't play Warcraft 3 and you don't know? Well, that's probably good then, because you're just going to kill him in a dungeon and he never comes back or matters again. Enjoy! Right, but there's stuff like that that's woven in, so you kind of see these characters in a new light. There's the story of the natives of Draenor kind of like getting their shit together to fight the Iron Horde. And then there's really just like the overall plot movement of Garrosh and the... Well, I would say like the Infinite Dragonflight, but like the whole thing with Kairos lasts just the first chapter of the Legendary Quest, and then he's already dead, but you get to see like for sure he's dead, and that's the end of that. And then there's just like the overall player story of like being the garrison commander and marshaling the forces of the Alliance and Horde in this new land and meeting all the natives, and some of that stuff's really interesting, but like the main thing I wrote about when I talked about it this week is that we'll never know how interesting it could have been because Blizzard shortchanged us on what Draenor was supposed to be. Like, we know there was a Shattrath raid because the BlizzCon 2013 presentation literally had it on the map. And it said raid. Like, there's zero ambiguity that that was going to be a thing. We just didn't get it because plans changed. Because they went for Legion instead. And rather than doing 3 tiers of Draenor and, you know, toughen it out right to the end, they just went hardcore all in on Legion. Which, on one hand, I think was probably the right decision. But there's this part of me that wonders how much better Draenor would have been received if we just got to play 3 tiers. Like, the biggest problem I think a lot of people had was that last tier, all of our time here in Hellfire Citadel, fucking dragged on. Like, for my guild, our sanity was restored because as soon as we got right up to Heroic, like, we were smashing in at the tail end. Like, when we got to the back end of Heroic Hellfire, we just quit. We just gave up. We just said, alright, well, we've seen these bosses, and we killed Archimonde on normal, and everybody's got their legendary rings, and you know what? That's good. We're fine. We're done. And, like, at the time, I didn't like that because I wanted the moose, but then I got the moose through a stream group, so all's well that ends well. And honestly, like, if we'd been raiding Draenor, like, long enough to get down Archimonde, I probably would have lost my goddamn mind. Like, I like these fights. I feel like it's worth saying that the best part of Draenor was the raiding, but honestly, like, I would have preferred to have another tier in the middle there. Shattrath would have been awesome. And to get back to the main point, like the lore thing, we missed out on a ton of lore that you can tell was prepared for that because we didn't get to play any of that. And there's lots of little bits of content like that. Like, we knew that Farallon was in the works, and that was going to be, you know, where Netherstorm is and what became Netherstorm in main universe, and that could have been cool. There could have been some lore there. We'll never know. Similarly, there was a small island off of Nagrand that could have been something. I don't think it would have been anything major from a lore perspective, but there was something there. And then, like, Gorgron completely changed in beta. Like, there was this totally different map with Iron Docks over on the east side. And then there was, like, some Grimrail Depot, like, rail tracks and train going through the whole zone. And you could see it. And it was interesting. And, like, so there was all this interesting stuff that just got left on the table. And what we got instead just felt really rushed. Like, you wanted to have this element where there was an Iron Horde and a Fell Horde. And the problem is the Iron Horde were never a threat, so we beat them back really quick. And then by the time we're all 100 and we're, you know, doing raids and stuff, we, you know, beat them down even harder. Like, now they don't have Blackrock Foundry, they can't make weapons. They're just fucked. Like, what are they going to do? And the answer to that is they're going to turn into the Fell Horde. But instead of having any time to deliver subtle nuances or to have Gul'dan kind of talk this up and deliver the message, all we got was just that dumb sneaking quest for the legendary, which I fucking hated, and I'm glad I never have to do it again, even though I've actually been leveling the garrison on Kale, and I thought to myself, maybe I should get Garona. I don't think you can, In fact, I'm pretty positive that you cannot, but I found myself thinking that because apparently I hate myself. But anyways, so the thing about that though is that that quest has no nuance. There's no time to develop any of those lore hits. It's just, oh hey look, Kilrogg, Gul'dan, and Grommash are hanging out at a tent. What do? Gul'dan thinks now's the time to offer up the Fellblood again. Grommash is still like, hell no. And then they're like, well, we're going to do this one way or another. And they put him down and Kilrogg drinks it. And so it's like, okay, well, that's cool and different. But, like, it doesn't matter. Like, I have no reason in lore to give a shit that Gul'dan and Kilrogg struck up an accord and that's the difference. And because in lore, like in the game, I have no connection to Kilrogg. You showed me him briefly during some quests, and okay, awesome, that's cool, but like there's no incentive for me to give a shit. He drank the blood. Okay. There's no significance to it. It just makes him a boss in Hellfire Citadel. And it shows, oh hey look, maybe Gul'dan's actually tricking these people by doing this stuff. And like, yeah, but like above board we already knew that. Like, we know what Gul'dan is as a character, it's just all the fucking Iron Horde toadies that don't. And it'd be nice if there was some development there, like, we get to see the Iron Horde, like, on the run, but we never actually really, like, see it in lore. Like, we kill Garrosh, well, Thrall kills Garrosh, fucking kill stealer. And then we, run off to Highmaul, which we're fighting because the Iron Horde are, like, supposedly in talks with them, but then we don't really see the Iron Horde other than a boat and them, like, fighting Brackenspore. And then there's this whole subplot with Cho'Gall that plays out on the mythic phase of Margok, and you're just like, does this matter? Was this, like, am I supposed to care? Like, yeah, Cho'Gall does stuff in Nagrand, and okay. And he's also at the Dark Portal when you first do that, and you enter Tanan and siege it and all that, but none of that stuff, like, matters. And none of it's really well developed. Like, at the end of Hellfire Citadel, I don't care. Like, I just didn't care. Like, okay, we beat up the Iron Horde, and then they turned fell, and we beat those up too. Awesome. Like, okay, that's an accomplishment, but it doesn't really feel special. It doesn't feel like anything mattered. Because after we, like, so decisively, like, fucked up the Iron Horde, what difference does them drinking Fellblood do? We killed a lot of demons before, too. It's not like this is out of our wheelhouse all of a sudden because they're green. Like, making them green specifically puts them in our wheelhouse. Especially for us Alliance players. Fuck the Horde. I know that's controversial. Please don't downvote me. So, at the end of all of this, we're just left with this, like, giant mess of an expansion. And, like, more of a mess than anything Blizzard's ever done. Like, this had the potential to be really awesome, and there were all these cool callbacks that could have happened, and oh, look, we're in Chatrath doing a raid, and this is where, Adal hung out, and maybe Adal is actually still there, and we'll never know, because it'll never get implemented. And that's the real sad part, right? Just like Abyssal Maw and Cataclysm, and now Chatrath and Farallon in Draenor, we're never gonna know what that could have been. I mean, in my head, like, there would have been this great connective story that would have been, I mean, okay, great for Blizzard, right? So it would have done the job. It would have connected the two pieces, and I would have probably been all right with it, and there would have been game content to play through. So overall, it would have been really happy, but I'd pick it apart anyways later in some analytical blog piece, and I'd probably look like an asshole for doing it, but that's fine. And so we'll never know. Just like Neptulon, like, gets, stolen away by Ozimat, and then he just kind of, like, shows up in the class hall for shamans, and it's like, hey, what's up? Like, as far as I remember, we don't even, like, get any acknowledgement of what he went through. He just, like, kind of decides to be our ally, and we're like, weren't you cleansing the waters? And then you got stolen away by a giant octopus. Like, what happened to that? Where'd he go? Is he still like hiding out there in the shaman class hall? Oh no. But you know, it's just there's so many elements of the game that could have been much better implemented, and they aren't, and they'll never get fixed because we can't go back to Draenor. It's not supposed to matter. And that's what sucks, right? Is like, I wanted to see what alternate universe Shattrath would have looked like. I wanted to have that moment of going through the places I remember so well from Burning Crusade and go, okay, that's pretty awesome. Like, that's the nostalgia that WoW players can get behind. It's not, you know, some zone that's loosely based on a thing from an RTS map, like the Broken Isles, say, but it would have been interesting and cool to kind of like go back to a place that we played in WoW in some form and go like, okay, that's interesting. This is what Shattrath could have looked like fully assembled. Because the whole interesting concept with Draenor in the first place was this idea that we get to see what Outland looked like without being this shattered hellscape. And like in some places, they absolutely delivered on that. It was fascinating to see like Gorgrond and Frostfire and see these different zones and to see how the desolation of Frostfire, but like the nice peaceful, like moist and cold desolation of Frostfire gave way to the sort of just desert hellscape of Blade's Edge alongside, you know, whatever came over from Gorgrond, because that's, you know, that's what happened there. And then to see Nagrand is really just like, Nagrand is like the greatest hits of Burning Crusade, right? Everyone fucking loved that zone, and so you don't mess with what works. So like, yeah, it's more expansive and it's a little bit brighter and a little bit cheerier, but at the end of the day, it's still like, no, there's the elemental circle, and this eventually turns into a horde village, and here's the arena, and I know this because for a long, long time it was one of my few options in PvP, and so I played the shit out of this map, and you get to kind of see like where these things come from. But there were like bigger pieces of nostalgia to tackle. Like we got Auchindoun, and I really liked the Auchindoun dungeon, and it would have been awesome to see what Shattrath would have looked like, just seeing that Draenei architecture unfettered, uninterrupted, unruined. But we're not going to get that, and that's disappointing for me to think. So every time I come to Draenor and I have to see that fucking implemented Shattrath, it just irritates me. Because it reminds me of this thing that Blizzard decided that we didn't want because Legion was going to happen. And so, as a result, we'll now never get it. And maybe they weren't far enough along in planning. Maybe it wouldn't have been that great. But I just want to fucking see it. I don't care if it would have been a subpar raid tier or like just poor aesthetic like decisions. I don't care. I wanted to just see it. And we'll never get to do that. Well, I say never. I mean, Blizzard could always surprise us, but generally I think we have the finger on their pulse here. They're not going to do that. But anyways, that's it for the video today. A bit of a longer one, I can tell. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it to the end, congrats. That's an achievement. Have 10 worthless Chivo points. I am streaming on Twitch, tweeting on Twitter, and writing on WordPress, and there are links to all of those in the description below. Go check them out. Thanks so much for watching. Obligatory YouTuber like, comment, and subscribe comment. Yeah, I'll see you next time. And until then, take care. And I'll see you then. I fucked up my own outro. I'm leaving it in. Fuck it, we're live. See you later.
Thank you.